Welcome to Miss Martin Muses. Welcome to Miss Martin Muses. Today we are musing on writing. We are musing on writing, most specifically prose writing. Prose writing. And I have here my trusty sidekick, AFK Bard, AFK Finn. Welcome. Welcome to Miss Martin Muses.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I look forward to talking about prose.
Exactly. I know. I love it. I love prose writing. Now, prose writing, I figured that we would go ahead and do a bit of a definition because I think sometimes it's conflated with nonfiction. Only nonfiction, but it actually can refer to fiction and novels and all that good stuff. So I'm going to bring up a definition of prose writing. And welcome everyone as you come in. Welcome. Today we are musing on prose writing. So what is it? What is prose? Well, we have the folks from masterclass.com. They're selling something, but they have some good stuff here. Prose is verbal or written language that follows the natural flow of speech. It is the most common form of writing used in both fiction and nonfiction. Prose comes from the Latin prosa oratio, meaning straightforward. So now you know. We are now all educated here. And of course, gosh darn it, I'm stopping the screen because it's making it blurry. So I do some nonfiction prose writing. And if I'm correct, you do nonfiction too. Am I correct, Finn?
Yeah, I've done nonfiction for the sickest of all, but I mostly write fiction.
But, you do? Oh, yeah. I did. Oh my gosh, I didn't even know you wrote fiction. Well, tell me about the fiction you've written and what kind of stuff.
Oh, well, I'm totally into fiction. I started a long time ago. He's like, I write a lot, but I don't do anything with it. It's really like a hardcore hobby for me that I just do on the side. And so like I write a lot of like super short blurbs and like shorter than short stories sometimes. But it was fantasy. I tried a little bit of sci-fi, but I don't know. I don't do science. And honestly, I've been doing a lot of like urban fiction type stuff right now, and I'm currently working on the beginning of a superhero story. So
holy crap! So you write these just for yourself, or do you publish them on like fanfiction.net or something?
A long time ago, it was fanfiction.net. A while ago, I wrote a couple things for Archive of Our Own. But honestly, it's just for myself. It's really embarrassing when people come over because, like, I write by hand too. It's always my first draft, and then I type it up. I think George R. R. Martin does that, or somebody else. I remember hearing that. But so I have a lot of notebooks that just lay around, and then sometimes I have to dig through them all because I don't label them properly. So I'm pretty scatterbrained.
Wow, well, that's pretty amazing, actually. I had no idea that you were such a traditionalist that way, because I do not write like that, not anymore. I'm almost completely computer. The only time I would use writing in notebooks was when I was bored in class and I would just doodle in the margin.
Hey, wow, so everybody did that.
Yeah, you actually keep notebooks of all these stories. That's pretty friggin' amazing.
Yeah, I'm going through old boxes in my parents' garage because they want to get rid of it, and I'm still finding stuff because I literally keep everything. And it's to a point where it's just like embarrassing, like almost pack rat, but only as far as like my writing and like my little art things go that I used to do. So,
wow. Well, no, that's cool. So, if you were to choose which genre that you liked to do the best, what would it be?
Up until recently, because of this new fascination with the superhero stuff, I was really into urban fantasy stuff. I've been reading the Dresden File series for like ever. It's just super long. But it was also the first story I read that was first person that I actually liked, because I've been so picky about first person like my entire life. Because for me, it's like that's a, a particular skill that not everybody has. And so because of reading the Dresden Files, it's by Jim Butcher. He's a great urban fantasy writer. I fell into it, and I wrote it for quite some time. And, basically, if no one knows what that genre is, it's kind of like Harry Potter, modern day, like with magic sort of ideas, like you can have fairies or vampires. That's urban fantasy,
Yeah, the definition of it technically is, it's fantasy in which the narrative uses supernatural elements in a city setting, in an urban city setting. So that, I guess, a lot of things that we consider when we think of things like vampires, for example, would be considered urban fantasy. I just never knew that.
Yeah.
Like what I'm thinking about is the originals that was on CW, and it was set in New Orleans, a bunch of vampires in there, a subset of the Vampire Diaries. So that would be an example.
Oh, I loved that show.
Yes.
But yeah, that would definitely be it. It's like a genre that kind of had to create itself, because originally all of it just fell into the fiction genre, and like, and then, or fantasy, depending on how much magic you really threw into something.
Well, that's cool. So that's one, and you gave an example of that. So you said you were in urban fantasy, and then you've done some superheroes. Have you actually created your own superheroes?
That's I'm working on. I've got like this. I was originally working on it as a short story, and I kind of want to like change the format. I'm not sure, because I was thinking if I write it first as like my own superheroes, my own story, then it could always be translated into a different medium. But I was just kind of inspired recently with all this stuff that's been going on, and like Marvel and whatnot. And I was like, I want to take a stab at it using what I've seen and what I like and what I kind of want to put into it myself. So I've been working on, it's like, this is the thing. My planning takes forever on certain things. So I'm still in I've got the characters, I've got the premise. I'm working on, like the super nerdy, like, what's this character weak against, and blah, blah, blah. And I've never really had to deal with that to that level in my other stories. So got to bring the nerd on.
Sure. And do you have any formal training in writing, or has it always been a hobby?
Well, it's always been a hobby. I went to college for English and literature. Nothing really came out of it other than me going, but I took some pretty liberal classes because I went to Evergreen, and that's like a super liberal, hippie, mostly left-wing college, I guess. They don't do the regular grading scale that other colleges do either. And so a lot of their classes, well, they're called courses, and they are quarters long. Semesters long, and you have multiple things in them. So you have seminar classes, you have, group classes, and, stuff like that. And anyways, needless to say, I did a lot of the English ones, and they were really weird and flexible and had different focuses. And one of my teachers was the author. He did a lot of co-authoring for some of the later Dune novels. His name was Bill Ransom, and but my experience with college, and even that, and that's probably as loose as you can get as far as an education when it comes to writing. I find that my style is just it's not something that I learn, or you could learn in some ways, because at the end of the day, they teach you how to pick up a pencil or a piece of paper, and they give you the words, and then you have to figure out how to get them there in your voice. So it's kind of what I took from it.
Sure. No, that's great. It says here that the function of prose in writing fulfill a story's promise. In literature, the purpose of prose in writing is to convey an idea, deliver information, or tell a story. Prose is a way a writer fulfills her basic promise to a reader to deliver a story with character, setting, conflict, a plot, and a final payoff. That's a loaded sentence there. I would put it up here, but it keeps getting fuzzy,
So basically a really good story.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes people will say, like, something is a crummy story. And they're all like, no, that's just how you feel. It's like, no, there are objective ways to see what is a good story. It's, for example, to convey an idea, deliver information, or to tell a story. Does it do this? Does it convey an idea? If you watch a movie or read a book and you can't even tell what the heck it was about, then it didn't do its job. Deliver information. Prose is a way a writer fulfills a basic promise. And this is, you have characters, setting, conflict, a plot, and a final payoff. And that often what we see in a lot of modern stuff, we see plots, but we don't see a final payoff. Mm-hmm. And they're almost like, ha, 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 you didn't expect that. And it's like, yes, we didn't expect it. We thought that there was going to be an ending.
Yeah. That's my thing. Yeah. I'm really big on the author promise, and it gets on. It's a pet peeve of mine where they pull a twist. In certain mediums, if you establish there's twists involved, that's acceptable for me. But like generally speaking, I'm like, you're telling a story, you've made a promise, don't screw that up.
I like what you said. You called it the author's promise. Is that a term you made up, or is that a term? I'll be honest, I don't know.
Oh, well, that's what I call it. I honestly don't know if there's a term for it, but it's basically just you presenting the story on the back of your book. And if it's not what you're promising in a way, then, you're being disingenuous with your story. And like a lot of really good stories, what you're getting, and you get it. Like the Lord of the Rings, for example. I mean, you get exactly what you expect from that series. But then there's other ones that have like very, very sharp twists. There was a series I read. I literally it scarred. This was like an extreme for me. The example where I was reading a 4-book series, and up until the 4th book, there was a very established through line story and relationship with characters. And literally in the second to last chapter of the book, they pulled the rug out and basically just changed it all. And I don't want to spoil it or anything, or throw flames at what the series is, but I literally threw the book, and I've never in my life thrown a book before. But that was me being very annoyed at the author for that.
Wow. No, that is really a good point. Did you say exactly what the name of that was? I'm just curious.
Well, I didn't say the series because I honestly I didn't want to what is it? Give a bias to anybody who might actually want to read it later. But technically, it's the Blood Ties series by Tanya Huff. She wrote it back in the 90s or late 90s. It was made into a series on Lifetime for a while. It's a urban fantasy series with a vampire, a hot vampire guy, a hot guy cop, and a super sexy lady detective, and she's between the two. And it's kind of like crime solving with fantasy elements. But writing wise and character wise, it's a really good series. It just takes a very sharp turn the second to last chapter, the last book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and I'm looking at different ways that people have said the author's promise. It is kind of coming up, but I'm not seeing it as a term the way you have. Mm-hmm. That, for example, people are giving their promises, like me as the author. And one person also said it really well. He said, if you don't like my book, I'll buy it back from you.
Well, hey, there you go.
Exactly. Well, and I like that. Well, because what's behind it, this isn't a whole article this writer does, is what he's saying is, if you don't like it, that's my fault, not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, I didn't do my job. That's what, you know, because he's saying the promise every author should make. And
Mm-hmm.
it's this is actually on Goins Writer Goins Writer, .com. Yeah, so I put that back. I think that that's a very good idea. And you're right. The great novels they have a promise and they always deliver. A good example of what I'm thinking of, well, you already said things like The Lord of the Rings, but there's also all the Jane Austen books, Pride and Prejudice, the Hunger Games. To be honest,
Yeah.
she delivered on that promise. Now, the ending was devastating, but it wasn't the kind of ending that was unexpected, because she had established from the very first chapter that this was a gritty, you know, realistic, horrifying world that they were living in. So was it going to have a tragic ending? That makes sense. But she also gave it a great denouement where, again, was to be expected. And I think another good example is Harry Potter. Say what you want. Yeah, she delivered.
That one is ultimate because, like, well, I don't believe believe her or not, but in interviews she stated how before she even wrote the series, she already knew how it was going to end, and that's a very good way to have, like, know exactly where you're going and tell people what you want to tell them. You know, so yeah, that definitely has a strong through line and voice. Like, I think that's what's another way to look at it, is like, not just, maybe don't call it a promise, but also that you have a voice that is present the entire time. If you change the narration suddenly in the middle of a story without any explanation or repercussion, as far as, like, stylistically speaking, I guess, that's jarring, and to me that's bad writing. But to some, that could be their own style, so I'm not gonna, like, say it's wrong, but yeah, I don't know, I'm rambling at this point.
Consistency is a big part of it. That's a really good point. And I must even say, it's objectively speaking is not great literature, but the Twilight series, it did deliver. I mean, it was pretty weird, but it did deliver. From the very beginning, it was established that she wanted to be with Edward forever and wanted to be a vampire and have a big family and all that, and that's exactly what happened. So that's another example I would think of. And I like what you're saying, because we're more familiar, I think, nowadays with them in our TV shows and in our movies. They mess around with that, and technically that would not be considered prose. But yeah, I'm trying to imagine a book, if I were reading a book and that happened, because you put so much more investment into a book. I'm just really thinking, it doesn't happen a lot, does it?
I guess the hope is that you never encounter it. But yeah, I mean, like, I guess we have those fears for stories that haven't finished either, but that's a whole other can of worms, because sometimes those don't even get finished. But the idea of prose in particular, I think, I mean, it's important for the other too, where it's just like, you're telling a story regardless. Get it done.
Yeah. Yeah. And to make a little bit of a curve with this whole author's promise, I would add that the author also has a promise to finish what he started. And we see this debate within those that are fans of the Song of Ice and Fire books, Game of Thrones, what the TV show was based upon. And the fact is that a lot of people are like, he doesn't have to finish it. He doesn't owe you anything. And I've heard a very compelling argument that actually, yes, he does. Because when you start a story and you say you're going to finish it, you're going to finish it. You know, if you're going to make it more than one book, and if you have a series, you need to commit to doing it, I guess.
It's like commissioning a piece of art, right? So it's like, and doing it in pieces. So like, think like what, Michelangelo, who's the guy who painted the Louvre or whatever that is.
Oh, you mean the Sistine Chapel?
Yes, sorry, I'm not European. Okay. But like, you know, it obviously took him forever to do it, but you know, he did it in pieces and stuff. And I think it's very similar when you present someone with a series. If you end your book with an open ending and a promise for more, you're selling it as a bigger piece. You know, if you end your book and it's a solid ending and you decide to do another book and it's like a continuation, but it has a solid ending, you know, that is understandable that, you know, you could stop at any point. You're selling it as individual pieces. But like, it's completely different if you have something much larger.
Yeah, especially where it's open-ended and where you're really truly only expecting it to be done when it's done. We know that we're not going to get the ending until the final book comes out of A Game of Thrones, and that's 2 books on. We're still waiting for The Winds of Winter, and then there's a book called The Dream of Spring. I like your analogy about that if you commission a work of art, you expect it to be completed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like imagine if you did a commission. I mean, you're exactly right. Let's say the Mona Lisa. And what if Da Vinci had only done like the corner of it and said, here it is, just chill, quit being so darned impatient. I'll finish it when I want to finish it. But you can look at the corner of it. It doesn't make any sense. And it's kind of the same way when they're talking about that. I mean, you just blew my mind. That's good. That's good stuff right there. And I just want to say a quick, well, you put it into words really well. And I think that's why we, in this particular situation, feel kind of like we're owed something. It's like, because you started it.
Yeah. Well,
now you got to finish it.
It's definitely a feeling that everybody really experiences that they might not understand. But I mean, like, it happens in TVs and movies and books and stuff. It's like, it's that feeling that, you know, you expected it, you know, you were told it in a way. And if we really want to get specific, we can always go to the final season of Game of Thrones. But, but from like, you know, objective way subjective. Wait, what? I'm like freezing my brain here. But basically,
is open to interpretation. Objective is just stating the facts, I guess. Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. From like an objective way, if you look at it, the story establishes a villain and promises a major confrontation, basically, and it builds to it, and it builds to it, and it builds to it, and it seems like the build was grander. So, okay, I'm going into slight subjective, but basically the scale of that confrontation did not meet the level of expectation for that, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
And the way that it was accomplished was one of those mystery box situations or a twist that wasn't even established. You know, it's like, instead of having a gun in the scene in the first, you know, chapter and then having it show up later on and making sense, it's like the gun is just there in somebody's hand and is used to shoot. That kind of idea.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. I just wanted to say hello to everyone in here. We have Happy Dinosaur. We have Tommy, of course, the host with the most. We have Ara, and let's see, and the Revenite, of course. Always great to see you all here. Always great to see you here talking about prose writing with AFK Bard. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And I think the reason why we don't see it too often in prose writing, because I just think that they couldn't get away with it. If you were to submit a book that didn't have that last part, I don't think a publisher would accept it.
Yeah, there's I think a much stricter, guidelines as far as this goes, because your book has to carry itself. There's no like extenuating circumstances that will elevate it. There's no like, I mean, if you're rich enough, you could just sell it with your name, or you could get publicity with like posters and stuff. But generally speaking, it's like your book has to hold its own, or your story, or whatever it is. And a publisher wants that structure, and they know from like all the stuff that they've read and their experiences, that they could tell when you don't fulfill, or your story is lacking, and they'll send you back. Like, generally speaking, if you like look at the big producers and whatnots, they're just looking at it as a whole, and they're like, cool, you got this big cool idea. I don't have to look at it and see if any of the moving parts make sense. As long as we have the outer shell of it, we're good.
Yeah, precisely. And we're talking about for what is prose, and that we're talking about the fulfilling a story's promise, and we're talking about the author's promise. Deliver character, setting, conflict, a plot, and a final payoff. Another good example of good examples of that is the mystery, and the mystery novels. Anyone by Agatha Christie, and stuff, that they set up clues along the way, and there are twists, but they were all set up and they were all probable, and it has that final payoff. Like, can you imagine a mystery where the whole premise is on who done it, and then at the very end they're like, does it really matter who done it? And you never find out.
It's the Scooby-Doo ending. It's just like, oh, it's that random dude.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And that's also considered bad fiction writing, detective writing. G.K. Chesterton talked a little bit about that. And even George R.R. Martin said it about if the butler did it and people guess it, so you change it to the maid did it, that you do a disservice to the story.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, a good part of a mystery story is, I used to read them. I had one summer I was so obsessed with mystery stories back in like middle school. I just read them all. But if you have a good one, the reader is figuring it out as they're going. They can actually see what you're giving them and piece it together. And if they figure it out, that's good. In a way. I mean, like, well, not always. I mean, sometimes you could just be feeding it to them and just acting like they're stupid. There's two very different sides of how to do that. But a good author will treat the reader like they're smart, and they won't throw it in at the end. They won't have the detective be like, it doesn't matter what happened. It was just an adventure. Here's me being smart. I figured it out. I do not like that in the end of any mystery.
Yeah. And I think that's why Agatha Christie, even to this day, holds up, and it's still, her books are bestsellers, because she was the master of writing those. And it is fun, because part of the game, part of the promise when you read a mystery is the game is you become the detective too. It's not just, Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple. You are the detective.
Yeah, the Dresden Files, I mentioned that earlier. The main character is a wizard, but he's also a detective. And the way their stories unravel, because it's all first person, is literally as he's figuring things out. You as a reader are literally having moments where you go, oh my God, because it's like these revelation type situations where as he's going, oh my God, I remember this, this, and this, you're going, oh my God, I remember that, and that,
Yeah.
And it's really good writing when you can do something like that, because it's like you're experiencing the story with the characters.
Precisely. And that's also what makes for good rereading, is so you can go back, like once you know the ending and you're like, how could I have missed it? And you rewatch it or you reread it again, and you can enjoy going through that journey now that you know how it ends.
Yeah, definitely. That's the whole idea of prose, right? You're telling your story.
Exactly, and fulfilling the promise. J.K. Rowling did that an excellent job. Harry Potter, each one of those books, with the exception possibly of the last one, were mysteries. There was always a mystery, and at the end, Dumbledore would come and explain it. He'd pull a Hercule Poirot, and you'd find out who the villain was, and there were twists, but the hints were always there too. Yeah. All right, and another thing about prose writing, you referred to this a bit earlier. Each writer has their own way of using language called a writer's voice, and you have to find your own voice. Using prose in different ways helps writers craft and show off this voice. And they give an example of an author's voice, what Charles Dickens uses in David Copperfield. New thoughts and hopes were whirling through my mind, and all the colors of my life were changing. That's just Charles Dickens to a T. And a lot of the greats, you can tell right away what their style is. Now, if I tried to create this kind of a style for something I would be writing, people would think, what kind of an idiot are you? It wouldn't work because you can't copy someone else's. You have to find your own.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I've changed my style, and I'm trying, like, I'm constantly, trying to perfect it, or whatever you would call it. Or, obviously there's no perfection in any art as much as an artist thinks there is. I mean, let's be honest. A person on the outside looking in on it can say it's perfect, but even that is subjective. So, but as long as you're working at it, that's what's important. And for me, that's kind of how I do it. I'm constantly looking for a slightly different voice, but at the same time, for me, I feel like I'm a sponge, so I pick up from other people, and I kind of like assimilate, and it's usually stronger right after I've read someone else's book or a series of books, and I kind of have to like distance myself slightly from it, because like I'll start writing something that I've been working on, and then I'll go back and read like my prior pieces and then look at the newer stuff, and I'm like, that's not the same.
Yeah, well, and it also grows in shapes. You also, in what you just said, you pointed out another must if you're going to be writing is you have to read. You have to read like a mad woman, read everything you can get your hands on, because it's like trying to paint without knowing the different colors that are out there to work with.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, and another thing they say is build rapport through familiarity. Prose is often conversational in tone. This familiarity helps connect readers to a story and its characters. Yeah, so yeah, it needs to be conversational. One thing that I do when I write an article, now I do my published work has been nonfiction, and I always speak it aloud. Even if I'm talking about, I don't know, George, some battle in the American Revolution, it has to have a flow to it. And if it doesn't, that's usually boring writing. And so I tend to write a paragraph. When I write a paragraph, I craft one, and then I go back and read it aloud. And as I read it aloud, I shape it. Do you do anything like that?
Mostly when I'm doing nonfiction, actually. It's, I don't know, because I feel like for me, I need to put more focus on making sense of it, because I'm not creating it. I guess I don't know. I think it's different. Like I think I mentioned to you earlier, it's like for me, it's like I'm formatting it and I'm making facts and explaining them versus like creating. But for me, when I tend to I'll go over and over it in my head as I'm reading it. For me, I am more focused on this in like the structuring and making sure I don't end with like with or like any other word like that, because that's just like it bugs me.
Yes, yeah. Well, and that is actually an amazing, perfect segue into what I was going to talk about next, which is the technicalities of writing. Is that you need to know how it works, that there is actually, how do we describe it? That there is actually a method to writing that is objectively bad. And sometimes people can break those rules, but only limited and only the great geniuses. Most of us cannot get away with this. What I have here is like how to write tight sentences. This is some of the practicalities. Eliminate unnecessary articles, such as an, a, or the are excessively used in loose sentences. They call them loose sentences. You want to have tight sentences. That's the other thing. The key word is write tight. There's a great book called Write Tight, which I would highly recommend. So a loose one, which is like basically bad. The best part about the party was that the homeowners were a wealthy lot invited the guests to the swimming pool where the water was intentionally kept warm. Yeah. And then tight is everyone enjoyed the swimming pool the most, which had warm water. Yeah. You didn't even really need what they had, like 2 articles there.
Yeah. That's, I do that. My writing is, I'm very scattered. So like I'll be writing and I'll realize, like, I don't know if I would call it what it is. It's not really dyslexia, but like I will write another paragraph and realize that that's something that would have come the paragraph before it, and then I have to like edit it in, so to speak. Like that's my thing. It's like, it's not so much the does and the does and the does, or like it's too long, more like too long but fractured, or I don't know how that probably doesn't make sense at all.
No, it does. No, it makes perfect sense. I think that's more about the way you structure the overall story, but for sure, absolutely. And I would also say that when I do sit down to write, I will sit down and I will write. It's just like, okay, here's my idea. Here we go. Boom. And I will write, and I won't think too much about those kinds of things. Now, eventually they do become kind of second nature the more you practice it. But I have a beginning and an end of each paragraph of each idea, and I just barrel through it, and then I go back.
It's kind of like a speed run for me too, where I'll start and I'll just keep going. And honestly, I'll just like, I won't go back and look at something while I'm still writing forward. It's generally when I have to put it down and like go do something, and it's been like a day or two. And then I go back and I'm like, oh, great, I'm going to have to remind myself. And then I'll go back. And that's when I, unfortunately, always end up editing. And I need to kind of skip ahead and be like, I'll get to that later. Because then otherwise, like it takes me forever to get anywhere, because I'm like, I have to edit this. And then I get back to where I was and maybe a little bit further. And then I have to go back again because it's been a few days. And it's like, oh, my God.
Yeah, exactly. And you actually bring up a good point, because we're talking about self-editing. And that's another fallacy that I've run across in my life, like where I'll get a submission that I have to work with, and it's like, just, you can, full of typos, got all sorts of stuff, and it was like nobody, like they didn't even look at it. And sometimes they're like, well, that's your job, you're the editor. And it's like, no, well, my job's the editor, not the writer, because actually, as a writer, you have to self-edit, because otherwise you're asking someone to write for you. So like, for example, cutting down this sentence that we had just used as an example, if you sent the first to me and then I was expected to tighten it up, then I have actually written it. But it is a writer's job to self-edit before you send it to an editor. And that's the other part of it as well, is that you do need to have an editor if you're not having anything maybe professional going on. Well, you can still have a friend or a colleague. So like sometimes if I'm doing something for a website, I'll have a friend of mine who I trust. She's a literature teacher, and she'll be my second pair of eyes, and we'll do it for each other, vice versa. And it's like, okay, this is what I've got. What do you think? And then further editing goes in, that sometimes you think something is really great or very clear, and then you don't know until someone else reads it that actually it was not.
I have the one issue where occasionally, and this is like something I've been working on, is like keeping track of items. Like it's like the simplest and stupidest thing, but it's like when you do a play or anything, you have props and you got to keep track of where they go in a scene. And it's like, for me, on occasion, I've like had something pop up in like a later chapter where I'm like, wait a minute, where was their phone in that scene? Or as far as like, because it was a situation that would have asked that question, or just like a logical question, because I'm like, later he's going to need his phone, but he had it at that point, but then he didn't. And I don't know, I am very particular about that too. Oh God. And so like, that's my going back. I'll like mark it with an asterisk and I won't go back immediately, but I'll like put the note on there, and then I might flip to that area in the previous page and make another asterisk so that I can know to like go and look for it.
That's a good point. Yeah, or use a highlighter or something to that effect. And sometimes people even color code. Glinzer has a really good comment here. He says, a first draft equals a sprint. Revisions equal a marathon. That is true. That is definitely a good way of describing it. But the revision has to happen. Yeah. I also should say that when I do edit stuff for publication, I will also read it aloud. I've said that I read aloud when I write. I also read aloud when I edit as well. Because again, if it doesn't make sense when I speak it, then there's something wrong with the prose. And I guess the difference between nonfiction and fiction writing is, well, several things, but fiction writing needs to have dialogue. You don't have that in necessary prose. And a book that tells rather than lets the characters speak, that you have to let them speak through dialogue. So that's also a portion of prose fiction writing that you don't necessarily have in nonfiction. Do you do a lot of work with dialogue, or how do you approach dialogue?
Dialogue is always the one I end up fixing the most. Because generally I'll have the scene and I'll have something that I'm working on, and if I spend too long getting caught up on like the nuances, I lose my flow. So like I'll have that, I'll like do my best and I'll go on, but then when I'm going through and editing, that's when I'm like, okay, this doesn't sound like something someone would actually say out loud, because I think a lot of stories that I've come across are too choppy. They'll be like, this person said a very short line, then they made this motion and they did this, then they finished by saying this other short line, and then it's the next person's turn to talk. It's very it's too sequential or not fluid enough for me.
No, I understand. And I what you said is also key, is that is it something somebody would actually say?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good way to vision, like, if you're having the conversation, would you be doing this?
Exactly. Or, that can also work, though, with certain people's voices. But you need to make sure it's true with that. Like, for example, if your voice is a politician, the person needs to talk like a politician. If it's person's a professor, the person needs to talk like a professor. All those things that you can't do, like a professor sounding like a valley girl or something to that effect, unless that is part of the characters.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so yeah, but I like that. I like what you said there. Another point, eliminate unnecessary words. Yeah, unnecessary words, repetitions, and useless details. Try to cut down as many obvious words as possible. Most of the time, a loose sentence, see, check this out, a loose sentence can be cut down at least 50%. The writer may believe that each of the details included are necessary when actually they are not. And this is an example of a loose one. Nikola Tesla shocked an assembled audience who were all really impressed at the conference held at Doomsgate by operating a 6-foot radio-controlled electric boat at the conference. A lot of unnecessary words in there. And then the tight version, Nikola Tesla surprised the audience at the Doomsgate conference by operating a radio-controlled electric boat. Boom. Yeah.
I know, right?
You don't say an assembled audience because that's redundant. Yeah.
Yeah, I have my best friend who I was in college with. Like, he followed me there a quarter after I started. He is the one who like has, I call them flowery sentences. That's kind of like what he would do. Like, he would just have not run on, but he'd just get very descriptive. Kind of like, I would almost say Tolkien had his moments where he would run away and describe a field of grass for like half a page. But generally speaking, there's a limit, because I would always catch him on his writing. I'd be like, this sounds really pretty, but maybe you could describe it, separately later on, or, like, just don't information dump with descriptions,
Yes, precisely. And I should also say that Tolkien gets away with it because he's Tolkien.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm always like, I'll get to the point, but he can get away with it. So sometimes people are like, well, Tolkien did it. It's like, yes, Tolkien is Tolkien.
Yeah, he was like painting pictures with his words. Like, I mean, sure, he took forever to describe the Rohan, what is that in the third book? I was just like, oh my God, please just get to the city. But, by the end of it, you can envision the entire countryside and like basically everything about it, which is like, there's so many authors who not only wouldn't be able to do that, they would focus on the wrong stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all I can say about that. Exactly. Glinzer says exposition and oh, that's a good point about dialogue. I lost it. Exposition and dialogue equals painful to read. Yeah, that's the other thing, is that you need to have dialogue, but don't put into dialogue what should be in the written part and the non-dialogue part.
It's the idea of show versus say. Like, if you're telling a story, which is funny because someone would be like, well, obviously you're telling a story, so you have to show it. But there's a difference between, someone explaining it in words, or, like having them just think it all in one block of text versus showing them and experiencing it or having it happen. Or I don't know, like, instead of having one person per se worry about something, a problem, like, I have a leaky faucet, oh my God, I can't believe I have a leaky faucet, like, have them, start stressing or acting stressed in other situations, and then, like, have the leaky faucet come up in conversation, or like, just don't dump it.
That's a very good point. Yeah, instead of acting like you're in a lecture hall. Good point. I do remember in the part of the Lord of the Rings, the TV show, in the Fellowship of the Ring, the movie, that was a great challenge for them, especially at the beginning of it. They talked about how much they had to rewrite it and re-edit it even after it was finished, because there had to be exposition through the dialogue, but how to do it without it being too much exposition. Yeah, so it doesn't mean that you don't ever have exposition, but you're right, you have to find a way to present it where it's not like that.
Yeah, like, well, a great example, still using the Lord of the Rings, as far as when exposition actually works, is when you have a scene where they're actually giving you exposition, like the council, and it makes sense. because like your people are arguing things that happened, and they bring it up naturally. It's not like, hey, remember that time when blah 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 happened? And it's just like, no.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, and welcome, Alformo Doritos. He says, Teresa, what if the exposition and dialogue is because the characters do not know it, so there needs to be exposition to the character that doesn't know? Yeah, and I think that's what we're saying, is that sometimes it is needed. It's just.
But generally speaking, when it's needed, it's needed for a reason. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just thrown out there, you know?
Yeah, it's not done when you could do it otherwise. Yeah, and like you said, there's different ways you can present it, or you have a setting, like for example, a council or something that will do this. Oh, yeah, someone like open it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Another short one would be basically like, say you have a fantasy story. You could have a villager walking alongside another villager and be like, man, it really sucks that there was that war like 10 years ago. Oh, man. And then you could also have the main character and them just walking into a village and seeing that it's been destroyed and that's been rebuilt, and it hints at something, and then later hint at it with more information. So it's like, unless it's necessary to know when you're walking through the door, you experience it and learn it, versus just having someone tell you it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Or you say like so-and-so was wounded at that one battle. Yeah, that battle really sucked. And that's why you're saying that they lost the battle and lots of people died, or he lost his best friend when that happened. And here's a good point of bad exposition. Open airlock policy. What are midichlorians? Exactly.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. But that's a perfect example of how not to do it.
Yeah. Or, a great way to do it, he could mention, like, wow, like he's got a lot of midichlorians or something like that. And then the mom can naturally be like, oh my God, is he going to be okay? Like, that sounds bad, blah, blah, blah. And then he could be like, oh, no, don't worry about it. It's this, because even that, he has a more natural way to explain it than a 10-year-old just be like, what are midichlorians? And it's like,
exactly. And the only place that would work is if you're in a classroom or something. Like they would do that sometimes in Harry Potter, like Hermione would ask a question of a teacher. But yeah, that's a good, dang it, girl, they needed you. They need you on set. I liked what you said. It's like, are you sick? What's a midichlorian? Oh yeah, here's another one. Happy Dinosaur. I hate sand. It's rough, coarse, rough, irritating, and gets everywhere.
Yeah, no kidding.
Not good.
I agree with him, but I don't think I would probably say that in just general conversation with a girl I like.
Yeah. Okay, and then yeah, George B.D. Lucas says writing prose isn't something you just do. Exactly. I mean, the kind of prose that I wrote mostly was academic stuff. I got that when I majored in history in college. I mean, that's just what you did. Years and years of writing, and then graduate school, and later I did do things like reviews or other essays. What do you call it? I guess it was a lot of review or editorials for the website Once Upon a Fan, and then I was the editor-in-chief on that. But it was the same idea that there was a way you write it, and there's a method to it. And you do reviews for that one website. Am I correct on that?
Not reviews. I've done like a couple different articles about just different things. I did one about Leslie Headley. I did one about, trying to remind myself about what I did. Gosh, it's been a little while since I did it. But my topics are more general, like, entertainment related.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, another example of prose writing that I did, now that I'm thinking about it, from this is something as simple as we were doing a certain character's clothes. Mm-hmm. And that is a style of prose writing, prose nonfiction writing, where you have mm-hmm. to use, again, those same skills with describing, like, so-and-so had this dress and it was this and all of that. And
you could have a
process. And even though when you look at the article, there's not a lot of words in it, mm-hmm. but you have to very carefully craft it and give it to that particular style.
You get a lot of prose in written articles sometimes too, about like celebrity mm-hmm. interviews and things. Some of them are like very flowery too. Like, you know, they'll have certain interviews where they'll describe like, well, we met in this house and we sat in this lovely chair and we had drinks when we were joined by the celebrity. And like, they literally describe like it as a story or an event. Which is very interesting. I don't know if you've ever encountered that. They're usually like in the GQ magazines and things like that, where they get an interview, somebody to sit down, and you know that's different than a lot of other ones where it'll just be like the article where like in an interview this was done, you know.
No, absolutely, yes. That's another way of doing it. Yeah, great conversations happening in the chat. Yeah, this is good stuff here. And another part about the technicality is about the passive voice, that you need to basically not do it. For example, a passive would be, a movie is going to be watched by us tonight. Active, we are going to watch a movie tonight.
Yeah.
Passive, the novel was read by Mom in one day. Active, Mom read the novel in one day. Get rid of passive, make it active.
Yeah, I used like all my old stuff, I'd say up until like junior high. I'll be honest, almost high school. Like I was very guilty of that in some of the stuff I was writing. Mm-hmm. But I am so hyper aware of it now that if I come across it, like when I'm going back and editing, I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking?
Exactly. And those are things that can be corrected very easily. Is once you're aware of it.
Well, I heard that somebody describe it as. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was gonna say I heard somebody describe it as basically it being more involved in the story. If you are telling it in past tense, it's like you're telling the story to the reader versus the reader being there as the story is progressing.
Huh. That's a good point. And do you prefer first person or third person?
I prefer third. I've only ever read 2 different book series that were first person that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
That's another thing about prose is that, and voices, is like you don't only have to find your own voice when you're writing a story in first person, you have to find the voice of the character because it's so difficult. Bad first person, in my opinion, is when you're reading a story and every single character sounds the same.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, for me, yeah, I've got the Dresden Files, and it was the first time where it actually sounded like just some dude that was like telling the story, and the other people around him were distinctly different. And yeah, not everybody can pull that off.
Yeah, it's definitely more difficult. That's why I never do it too. I cheat. Yeah, Open Airlock makes a comment. Passive can be stylistic. I would agree with you. Yes, it can be. Just be darn careful about how you do it. And I think, that, again, that's one of those situations where you really need to have your style of writing really crafted at that point before you break the rule.
Like certain like sports guys who will like hold a baseball bat differently or like, you know, shoot hoops slightly different than like the normal, and it's okay because they're still like incredibly good at it, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like saying sometimes when I do vocal coaching, someone did like a kind of a sigh slide and it sounded actually terrible. And I was like, you know, you need to make sure you hit those notes precisely. And she was like, well, I was trying to do it like this, you know, the way Billie Holiday does. And part of me is like, yeah, Billie Holiday did it great, but no, you're going to hit the note.
Yeah.
That And also that most of them didn't just wake up magically one day and have that style. It was from a lot of training. I always like to point out that, for example, Elton John, he was classically trained.
All right. He had a beautiful voice.
Oh, amazing. Absolutely amazing. Let's see. And then Storyman Jack. Thank you for being here, Storyman Jack. You must make the reader live the moment. Good point. Smells, sounds, etc. Every sense you can get in there so a movie plays in your head. That's yes. Yes, it's almost like you're seeing it. You're living inside of it. That's a very good point. Absolutely.
Yeah, that is that kind of fine line between, describing a room like there's a sofa in the corner with the TV and a window on the far west wall, or, like giving you a general description. And then there's also, you could go in and be like, I don't want to like try to write a whole story in voices, but, like describe it more. So like you're actually there.
Mm-hmm. Precisely. And sometimes that is world building, but I'm not sure if that's the same thing. World building is something slightly different, but same idea, same concept. You've got to live in this place. You've got to be there.
Yeah, good world building is like when someone brings something up later and you're like, oh yeah, that's over there.
Yeah. Avoid imprecise words. Good point. Yeah, writing tight sentences also means you are being specific. In doing so, you need to avoid words such as things, stuff, and whatever. So the loose version. I have a feeling Mom went through my things just to find whatever stuff she had been looking for. Tight. I get the feeling Mom went through my drawers and closet to look for her missing earrings. Bam. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we sometimes speak very poorly. We use the stuff, the whatever imprecise wording you can get away with in casual conversation, but not in writing.
Oh, so yeah. I sound like an idiot when I talk, but I at least take time when I'm writing.
Yeah, that's why it's so much easier to write for me than to speak extemporaneously. Oh, here's something I want to bring up here. Happy Dinosaur says, my life often has an unfaithful narrator. It's called schizophrenia. And then Glinzer says, that's an intriguing opening line for a first-person point of view story. Actually,
oh my gosh.
Yes, it is. Well done, Happy Dinosaur. I don't know if that was your intention, but
yeah, right. I think Happy disappeared because he's gonna go start writing it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Let's see, and Open Air Policy says, I am reading Darth Plagueis for the first time. Good book. And Lucina is making me notice stuff about Naboo and never saw him film. Yes. Very well done. Alformo Dorito says, I disagree. Imprecise words are good if only for dialogue or in characters' thoughts.
Well, yeah. That's true. That's different. It could totally work, especially if like Teresa brought up earlier, like the Valley Girl, for instance. And if you're in their head and they're like, Mom was looking for whatever, then it's like, okay, that can work. But it, generally speaking, I think is what they are kind of establishing. Because, I mean, if you're in the middle or you have like, I don't know, that would just be a very jarring narrative to be trying to tell a story and then not knowing exactly what they're trying to describe, because they don't really sound like they do either.
Yeah. And sometimes you can do it, especially for effect. For example, if someone says, there's just a lot of stuff I have to deal with. And then someone's like, oh, what stuff? But yeah, you have to explain, and it gives them personalities. Yeah. There's never any absolute reading, rules, like, because there are always rules are made to be broken in any kind of craft, but you still need to learn the rules first.
To quote Barbosa, they're more like a set of guidelines than actual rules.
Yes, exactly. And same thing with composing music, that but it doesn't work though if you don't know the rules first. It's like you have to, that's one thing we always told, when you're composing, you have to know the rules before you can break the rules. And if you are going to break the rules, you better, by golly, be Mozart. You know what I mean? Because otherwise you'll just make noise. There's a reason why the greats are considered great. Here's an example. Glinzer says he has a good example of an imprecise line from Sardonicus, the movie. My master tells me to do a thing, and I do the thing. Yeah, and it can be, especially in context with it. Yeah.
That's true, especially in that context. If even the sentence alone actually says a lot about the story, because it condones that master being someone who orders. So in theory, the thing, it doesn't matter. You're just going to do. Right?
Yeah. Correct. Oh, here's some more tips. Remove sentences that don't add meaning to the main idea. Some sentences are far off topic. That's just clutter. Yeah, and that's just common sense, but sometimes common sense isn't very common. Yeah, if it's clutter, if it doesn't add to what you're doing, then don't do it. And then try out various ways you can write your sentences, eliminating unnecessary words without obscuring the meaning or missing out important details. Do this exercise until you're satisfied that the sentence is as short as possible. Yeah, that's a technique. It's almost a challenge. Make your sentence as short as possible. But that doesn't mean it has to be a short sentence, but as short as what you're trying to say within the sentence.
Definitely. Yeah, because also I've noticed issues with some things that I've read, and also my own writing. I never say that I've never messed stuff up. Is that you can get caught up in a conversation where you describe something is being described between like what people are saying, and it'll break up that conversation in a bad way. It'll like destroy the flow, because the reader might be like, wait, what were they talking about, when someone replies.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of maybe when you're in a conversation and you're all really jiving with it, and then one person just comes out and says a total non sequitur. Everyone's talking about, let's just say, the recipe for a filet mignon, and then someone just randomly comes in and starts talking about, hey, but you know what? When I really like to hang out with my friends on the back porch, blah, blah, blah. And immediately the flow is gone. Yeah. Storyman Jack says, on my channel uses senses. It's like a flash fiction story. Yeah, and flash fiction, that's actually kind of a genre. It often depends on the genre. So it says dialogue has total different rules than prose. Actually, dialogue is a part of prose. We talked about what prose was at the beginning. In general, prose is everything. Ultimately, it's not poetry. But I understand what you mean. You're talking about maybe more non-spoken portions of...
Yeah, and structurally speaking, anybody could really speak in any way that would go against the general grain, which is very true.
Exactly.
Again, that comes down to the individual character and personality, and it kind of excuses it. But if you encounter it, I think, in regular, formatting and sentencing and stuff, that's when it comes down to the editor going, "What is this?"
Yeah, a good example is in some of my historical nonfiction prose. Let's see, what's a good example of one I did? If I'm talking about Maryland, the colony of Maryland and its founding charter, for example, I can't say things like things and stuff or unnecessary words or things that are not related to that, because it just wouldn't go along with the purpose, and it would just be weird. It's like in Maryland there was lots of stuff that happened. It sounds amateurish. And then as far as adverbs are evil, a necessary evil at times, but not great to use. Yeah. And that's in general too, there is that learn the rules so you can break them. Yeah. Avoid using, speaking of which, unnecessary adverbs. For example, Jane shouted out loudly can be written as Jane shouted out. Loudly was an unnecessary adverb. Obviously, a shout has to be loud. Yeah, so that's almost redundant. Avoid using too. Oh, wait, that's a different point. Okay, yeah. So yeah, watch those adverbs.
Oh yeah.
And then avoid using too many weak verbs. Is, are, were. That is correct. Use more definitive verbs that specify the action.
You know, I learned some songs in 4th grade, and that was one of the ones I remember. It goes, the verb is a man of action. He's busy all the day through. He runs, he walks, he visits, he talks, he does whatever you do.
Nice.
So there you go.
There you go. Those are great. And then, of course, last but not least, they say writing takes practice. Yeah, writing takes practice. So why? So keep practicing. Absolutely. Keep practicing until you can't. Oh, Alforma actually points out that this article, maybe missed a point because they said they should have just been shouted out. He says that they could have just said, Jane shouted. You are correct. They could have even shortened this in the article. Well done, Alformo. And marvelous. Tommy says, gonna load every segment with adverbs now. That article can't tell me what to do.
There you go. Viva la revolution.
Yeah, well, and that's the love and the joy of us being able to have our own websites, us being able to do our own fiction. Now, you can find my fan fiction at fanfiction.net under Teresa Martin, and some of it's there, but all my fiction is more experimental. It's not really what I do, but that can be fun. I can put up whatever I want, and no one's stopping anyone. Same thing with YouTube. However, it's not guaranteed that people have to listen to what you say or read what you say, and that if you do have a command of these, your probability of doing it well goes up exponentially. It's very much like if you say you want to play the piano. If you want to play the piano well, it's a good idea to have a teacher and you practice. It's just all there is to it. Even
Indeed.
the great. Sorry?
Indeed.
Oh, yeah, indeed, yeah. All right. Alformo Druda says, I write fan fiction too. Yeah, and fan fiction is a great exercise. And that's how I've always looked at it. It's a great exercise, and it's also cathartic because things can, like if I really don't like the way something went, and I feel like I have to fix it. They're called fix-it fictions. I've done those. I got to fix this story. There are lots of fix-its after the ending of the Game of Thrones TV show. A lot of fan fiction fixing it, and a lot of YouTube articles.
Yeah, right. I haven't written fan fiction in for the most part in years. I did do 3 very short short thicklet thingies for Spider-Man, but they were Christmas related, and they were each Christmas, so that's not too bad.
Oh yeah, no, and they could also be fun things like Han and Leia on their honeymoon, there's a lot like that.
The
a lot of fan
came
fiction
along.
like that. But I meant like what they did for entertainment on their honeymoon. Or it could be, sticking with Star Wars, it could be, Jane and Jason's first life day. What they call fluff fan fiction. I would also do some speculative, like the ones I did. I started my account in 1999 because of the Phantom Menace, and I just couldn't wait to see what's going to happen. How's Anakin going to turn bad? So I was so obsessed with it that I actually wrote a fan fiction saying what could possibly happen, because all of us were just so into it. We just wanted to read more. So that was a lot of fun. And I do find that when I did write the fiction like that, it helped my normal writing as well. Because anytime you write, it is never a waste of time.
Well, a lot of people nowadays, I think a lot of people are starting doing that, which, I mean, technically, I think Twilight did that And then obviously the girl who did hers that was inspired by Twilight,
50
kind of
Shades of Grey.
inceptioned it. But I think in general, it's like, yeah, fan fiction, literally, if you just change the names, is someone's fiction. And then you can elevate it from that, it's really, in a way, it is a medium that I think a lot of people shun, that it gets crap that it shouldn't have crap.
No. Yeah, there's a lot more going on besides the smut stuff.
Yeah, right. That's pretty much what everybody thinks fic is.
Yeah, and I mean, you could read. Obviously, I don't have smut in mind. Yeah, you can do that. I did a lot with Once Upon a Time as well. Okay, Storyman Jack, he clarified. Let me rephrase. Narration is different. Dialogue, especially internal dialogue, should include dialect and any unusual tics a character has. Therefore, you may misspell items in order to get sounds. Yeah, and that's where, yeah, I think that's what we were also saying, is that there, need to know the rules before you break them. It's like, why are you doing that? It's like, well, if it's dialect. So if you are doing a Cockney character, like in a Charles Dickens kind of story, yes, you would write it out like that because the character is Cockney. Yes.
Yeah, actually, I'm guilty of reading a few fics for a British show called Misfits back in the day. I don't know if you had ever heard of it, but one of the characters had like a really, really thick accent that even the other British characters made fun of. And I read one story that someone had written where they included, like they spelled the words that she was saying slightly different, and I could actually hear the character saying it. Then I read another story where they just, had her saying the words, and I was like, like there's a distinct, definite difference in how you can portray a character doing that. So that's a very good point that you brought up.
Oh, he tried to share the link? Really? That's not me? Oh. Let me see if I can click on that link. See, oh wait, it got retracted?
Oh, what you looking for?
Oh, he put my...
Oh, Tommy tried? Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. Oh, well.
For your YouTube page?
Teresa Martin. Well, thank you.
Oh, here, I can pull it up.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, and it's funny because, I mean, for crying out loud, I was also learning a lot about writing at the time, so you see the difference in how it all happened. And I did Lord of the Rings ones too. Let's see.
Oh, cute! He found your fic.
Let's see. Is it there? Yeah. Wait, why does it bring? Oh yeah, there it is. Oh yeah. Yeah, some of them. What I put, like, sucks to be me. That's the story of Robin Hood. Yeah, a lot of Once Upon a Time ones I did, and let's see. Oh yeah, the Two Cities, Minas Tirith. I did an alternate universe one, and then it was called The Will of the Damned. It was based on The Will of the Force from the prequels in The Phantom Menace, and one I called The Will of the Force, which is where I did an alternate history where they followed the will of the Force and didn't train Anakin, and that actually made him not follow the dark side. And I called it The Will of the Damned, which is where he does fall to the dark side. So it's all my speculation. Well, thank you. That's a trip down memory lane looking at that fiction. Thank you. Yes, that's the right one. Yeah, it was written, 1999, August of 1999. Wow.
I wonder if they still have really, really old accounts on here, but I wouldn't even. I don't even remember what my my login would be for this one. Whew. Oh, fan fiction. Oh
yeah, and I even have one called Tatooine Housewife about Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru.
I love it.
Someone said it sounded like the title of a porn, but it wasn't intended that way.
I love it.
Gosh, that was 21 years ago. Phew.
Oh my gosh.
Winifred
Yeah, I
Twitter
was
is
just
what
thinking
messed me up.
about that. Way to date us. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, and so Storyman Jack's writing a book too. Okay, well, thank you. That's good to know. Yeah, keep us updated on that.
Yeah, man.
That's so funny. Oh, I still have this on up here. Okay. I did find a quote I was looking for from G.K. Chesterton because he was talking about bad detective stories, but this also goes along with what makes a bad story. And to bring this kind of full circle from our first point, it says most bad detective stories are bad because they fail upon this point. The writers have a strange notion that it is their business to baffle the reader, and that so long as they baffle him, it doesn't matter if they disappoint him. But it is not only necessary to hide a secret, it is also necessary to have a secret, and to have a secret worth hiding. The climax must not be an anticlimax. It must not merely consist of leading the reader a dance and leaving him in a ditch. There we go.
There you go. Yeah. That's
And
it
that
in a
also
nutshell.
goes along with bad writing in Star Wars. That's just what keeps me in mind, especially everything that they seem to have been saying. And other shows like Lost were guilty of it. J.J. Abrams stuff is often guilty of that.
Oh,
it's like,
dude, we didn't even touch on canon.
Oh, yeah.
As far as prose go, that should be a part of it too. If you're telling your story and then midway through decide to change it up, that's kind of messed up too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, good point. Let me see. I'm going to look that up. Yeah, about canon. And yes, and once you create a world, you have created your canon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not the writer's point to disappoint the reader. That is not the goal. And those that make it their goal suck. Because that's not a noble goal. It's to disappoint the reader, to leave them a dance and go, ha, ha, ha. You thought it was going to be something good and it wasn't. It's like, no.
It's disingenuous, very snake oilsy to do that way, to sell something, any product like that technically. But writing in particular, that whole artistic thing, because you can get a bad bottle of beer and get it replaced, but a book that's part of a series that never goes anywhere, that cheats you, that's a hot mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a good example of doing that just for the sake of doing it was when they tried to explain why they had Arya kill the Night King instead of Jon Snow. And what the writers of the TV show said, well, everyone expected it to be Jon Snow, so we figured we would do something different or something to that effect. And I'm like, that's not a good reason, just because everyone expected it.
That's messed up. I was going to say, did you ever happen to see Arrested Development?
It sounds familiar, but I cannot say.
It was a television show on Fox. Early 2000s, about a really messed up family that lives together, basically. But there was seriously a through line from season 1 where they hinted so subtly at something that like you would never have noticed. There's a character who loses a hand. It's a comedy, so whatever. But he loses it to a seal. And it sounds ridiculous, but when you go back to like the first season, if you think about it, his mom's name is Lucille, and he was attacked by a loose seal. And then in the first season, he goes to his housekeeper's house, and there's a giant hand chair that she took from his house that his mom had given her. And he's like, oh, there's my hand. I thought I lost it. And there's like all of these like subtle things throughout the show so that when it happens, you're like, oh, hey. like stuff like that. And then other things that just tease you that are fun is if you ever seen Hot Tub Time Machine story-wise, that one's fun because they travel back in time at a ski lodge, and in the present day they meet somebody with one arm, and when they go back in time the person has two arms. So the question is, will they lose it in the movie?
Well,
see, and it becomes part of the story. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a good point about how are we talking about canon? Maybe I lost the point because I was thinking about it in terms of.
Well, as far as like explaining why something happens or like why something exists, and having like something come out of the nowhere, like Arya, just it doesn't make sense. Like if you had somebody just randomly lose an arm in a scene that's like complete, where the story has been like very lighthearted comedy and like everything, you'd be like, oh my God, what the heck? Where did that come from? But if you're joking that it will happen the entire time, then it doesn't feel like it was forced.
Understood. Okay, I got you. You're too smart for me. All right, yeah. No, that all makes perfect sense. And also that for something to be funny, I'm going to maybe segue that into the idea of canon, is the thing that really fell short in the Rise of Skywalker movie was the whole joke, they fly now, they fly now, they fly now. First of all, it was kind of stupid, but also it wasn't funny because they had already established in Disney canon that they did fly and they knew that they flew. So it was stupid.
That's true.
Yeah. And it says here the definition of canon. Canon was the material accepted as officially part of the story in the fictional universe of that story. Yeah. And it needs to, and part of what is canon to the story, what is accepted and officially part of the story, therefore, as you are writing it, it cannot contradict that either.
Your story loses credibility and like its strength when you change things midway, because it starts like basically saying like, why take it seriously, or why invest in, like, it's weird because it's basically promising the reader that they have nothing to invest in. So like if you had like a couple characters, well let's just say the prequel series to Star Wars versus like the whole idea of the prophecy, by just having the prequel trilogy, it is just basically stomping out the whole premise of the prequels and the original series. And so as if you did that in a book, let alone in the movies, I mean, that we've experienced, that's just like, it devalues it.
Yeah. Or like in Lord of the Rings, if they'd, I'm trying to think of where, if they had broken their canon, well, or just something just as simple as if in the Two Towers they said, remember when we first met, if Aragorn said that, remember when we first met in the Shire? And then they were all like, yeah, that was a good time. You were at that party. And we would all be, no, that's not when you met the hobbits. You met them at that inn, after the journey had started. You were never at that party. And that's certainly not where you all met. So that would break the narrative. Of course, it usually, hopefully, wouldn't be something that glaringly stupid, but that's an obvious example of, no, that's just not what happened. And
or you...
And if you can change that, what else are you going to change? And are you going to waste our time then by us reading what else you've got for us?
Well, that's definitely, I know, it's like, I have not experienced that, thankfully, as much in like books and novels and stuff like that. But yeah, you experience that all the time in other mediums. But
television and movies,
canon really is the backbone of a story, and at the end of the day, you're making one. And unless it's part of the narration, because unreliable narration is really well done. If it's really well done, then that's a great story. But unreliable because the author is a bad writer. That's another thing entirely.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, unreliable narrator is a great technique. Agatha Christie does that masterfully in one of hers. Well, then again, she's just a master.
That can make for a really great story because you have just like immediately an extra layer. Like, gosh, what is that? The Fight Club. That's a great example. Because you basically get two completely different stories if you watch it back to back.
Yes. Yeah. An unreliable narrator is a narrator whose credibility is compromised. Yep. And it's great. But you're right. You want it to be an unreliable narrator in a good way, not because you suck at writing.
Yeah, that really falls into a bad category if you're trying to, you're not intending to be an unreliable narrator. Yeah. Did you happen to ever see the movie Synecdoche in New York? It had Dennis Hoffman in it. I would definitely recommend that as far as narration goes and storytelling. It's just like you watch it and it gets more and more cerebral and from his point of view, and it's like basically this guy he lost his chance of being a director for plays, and so he's making his own and he's basing it off of his real life. So then it starts to be like, what one is the real one? And as he's telling the story, everything gets really artistic, like the way he is seeing the world. And I don't know, it's very cerebral, but it's a great movie. It's got Dennis Hoffman in it, and it's worth a watch. So you're just like reminding me of it now with all of this stuff.
Oh no, I think that's great. And strangely, I think a good example that we see almost every day of an unreliable narrator is a little bit of what J.K. Rowling became.
Now she's wrecking her canon. And that's a different kind, though. That's when you're like just adding it in and forcing it in.
Yeah. But again, an unreliable narrator in a bad way, because when she sits there and says, yes, it was, and everyone's like, no, in Prisoner of Azkaban, this is what you wrote.
Yeah. I definitely, that's so true. It's the intent to try to change the meaning of what she wrote. But, as a writer, it's kind of hard to go back and change it when you wrote it out pretty clear.
Exactly. Well, the way she's trying to show it being more inclusive by having, my name was black. And then she said, I've never said she was white. And then everyone shows all the places where she said she was white.
Yeah, I know. It's like you did too good of a job. We know what your characters look like because you described it to like super detail.
Precisely, to a T. And part of me is like, no one's going to sit and judge you for not, quote unquote, being diverse enough. Because for crying out loud, yes, nowadays people would probably do that. But the books first came out in the mid-90s where everyone wasn't so obsessed with that. But don't try to tell us that you had racial diversity when you didn't. The one could argue they actually did, but just none of the top three were.
Yeah, basically anytime you don't describe a character too much, I mean, you do have that space. Like, I have read some books where they haven't ever addressed the race of a character. And, that's perfectly fine because then you're like, yeah, basically as a reader, you can be exactly that character in a way. I mean, you can be that character anyway, but I mean, as far as when your casting goes, it doesn't limit you at all. And you don't have people like going back and highlighting lines in like book one where it's like, you said this.
Exactly. And also how in Fantastic Beasts, she had people like McGonagall being at a certain time period when she'd established that this character wasn't born until the 1930s or something.
I was kind of annoyed with that because I mean, reading the books, I always got the impression, honestly, that McGonagall was younger than they cast her in the movies. But then again, I'm a very bad judge of some of the stuff that is in age-wise in books. But I don't know. I thought she was like in her 40s or something, or 50s at least.
I think she was supposed to be in her early 60s or so, because she was supposed to have been born, from what I understand, in the 1930s.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Fantastic Beasts, they had her be there like 30 years before that.
Old.
Yeah. And welcome, Poet Scotty, welcome. Yeah, so that's just another example of an unreliable narrator, where it's not that people are racist or sexist by complaining about it. We're just saying that this isn't what was presented, and don't change it. Don't treat us like we're stupid.
Yeah. It's one thing to say that you meant something that wasn't there originally, but then you can also say that you're changing it and openly say it, and then you're like, well, okay. At least admit that you're doing it that way.
Exactly. Now, I would think that one area where she kind of clarified something that was not necessarily playing foul was when she said that Dumbledore was gay.
Exactly.
Because when you read, especially the Deathly Hallows, it's pretty clear that it was heavily implied. You could read it as deep friendship, but when you consider the fact that we never saw him with a partner or significant other, and the way that she described his feelings for Grindelwald and the way he refused to fight him, just all that kind of thing, that actually made sense. We just all felt like it was chicken because she didn't want to put it in the book. It all the book don't come out to say that.
Yes, that was honestly, I think, the biggest part of the outrage. But honestly, I think that for me, saying it at all is because if it's in there, which, as you said, it is. There is some subtext. Honestly, some of the best writing is subtext. You don't have to say it out loud. You can have a very strong relationship between two people and never have one turn to the other and say, I love you. And when that happened in Star Wars, for example, you have a really good response where instead of saying, oh yeah, I love you too, it's just like, I know. And then you got that's character right there.
Precisely. And to be honest, I felt like they were gay for each other before she said so. And when you read it, it's like, oh yeah, that was definitely not just two dudes being friends. So she didn't even need to, but I understand exactly your point. But when it changes plot points and other key things, that's silly. And I think it's hurting the Fantastic Beasts trilogy.
Yeah, like the cursed prince or cursed whatever. Yes, did you see that one?
No, I'm not going to pay money for that.
That is another example of bad breaking canon. I completely forgot about it, but it involves using the time turner, and they screw it up entirely.
Yeah,
they basically establish in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban that no matter what you do, it happens. It's just like a different perspective, basically. And then in the play, they just you can go back in time and change everything. And it's like, no, you can't.
Yeah. And Hermione basically said something to the effect of terrible things happen to people that try to.
Yep.
But not necessarily that. Yeah. I always wonder if they're going to make a movie out of that, because the actors are almost old enough to be.
Oh, dude, that would be actually the perfect time if you're gonna to do it. I don't want to blow that chance.
Yeah, and I must admit, even though from what I've heard of Cursed Child, it sounds dumb, part of me is like, how cool would that be? Because when you look at Rupert Grint especially, and the actor who played Harry Potter, they actually are starting to look like the way their characters were when they were aged up in the final movie. They literally in real life were starting to look like that, and I'm thinking,
It's so funny how that works.
yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Now, Hermione, she's going to look like she's 12 the rest of her life.
Yeah, right.
She
She and Macy Williams.
Yes. I'll still never recover from episode 2 of the final season of Game of
I'm
Thrones.
right there with you.
When the whole world immediately Googled her age.
Yeah, right? I mean, like, that scene. Yeah, that was just super awkward.
I did. I was like, what? She's only like 14, these perverts. And then I looked it up and she was like 22. And then they said the next day that was the most Googled item is how old is Maisie Williams?
Yeah. Oh my God. That was funny. But yes, exactly.
Yeah. Good example of, she's going to be 12 forever. She's
yeah. So did you see the Hook movie back in the day with Robin Williams?
Yes.
Another great example of aging up. What's her face? McGonagall.
Maggie
Smith. She played like a super old lady in Hook in the 90s, and now she looks like.
Yeah.
It was just weird because back then I thought she was that old, because they did a really good job. But then I saw her after the fact, and I'm like, she's not that old, but now she is.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting how we thought she was old when we were younger.
Yeah, everybody's old when you're young.
It's like she's a baby. What are they talking about? She was a fetus when she did that. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and start winding it down. This was great. I really enjoyed our conversation today, and I've learned a lot about prose writing and loads of good insights. And thank you for everyone that came out. Poet Scotty, Ancient One, Tommy, the host, the mod with the most, open airlock policy, Alformo Doritos. I hope I get everyone. Ancient One, AFK Bar. Oh wait, that's you. Storyman Jack.
You're welcome.
If I miss anyone, I do apologize. Thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you for everyone coming out. Have a great Sunday. And be certain to practice your prose writing.